I think All Might legitimately feels ashamed that he couldn't stop Izuku. I think All Might's gonna keep himself away because he can't bear to face Izuku because he couldn't help Izuku. He had to let kids get involved to help Izuku because he couldn't do it. Yeah, I feel like this is gonna be drama. Hey everybody, it's Tripl-L coming in to talk about My Hero Academia chapter 326. For the guys that were with me on live stream, I'm like 90% better. I'm almost there, but still not there. So apologies for the late upload on this one. I'm sitting down to do this on Saturday afternoon when my voice was a little better. We're going to get into the chapter. I don't want to spend too much time on it just to make things easier on me so I don't have to talk too much. But the chapter, thankfully, is relatively simple. However, I think the chapter is going to be a little bit of a litmus test because I think this chapter might end up flying over some people's heads depending on how careful they're being with reading the chapter. And honestly, looking at it, like the chapter is a little bit tricky because you can't listen to what Stain is saying and take it at face value because Stain's insane. And in this case, Stain's playing a really weird game. And I will build my argument as to why I believe my interpretation is correct. But I believe I'm going to be correct mostly on this. In terms of general notes, there is something I want to talk about. Because I did tell one of the viewers, Matthew, that I was going to talk about it because he brought up a really good point about the heroes and Stain's rhetoric. But I'll leave that for the end of the video. What I do want to say is that, you know, when it comes to Stain, I'm always surprised by how people get so excited by him and they think he's the greatest thing since sliced cheese, and it's just like, no, he's not. Even in this chapter, you see a lot of spots where it's like Stain is an idiot, and the people that follow him are idiots, like Spinner and Dobby. Spinner and Dobby have said stupidly stupendous things. Or stupendously stupid things, there we go, when they've been referencing Stain's dialogue, and it's just like, yeah, no. At this point in Hero Academia, I get that people like getting excited about the villains and all that, but at the end of the day, the sensationalism isn't with the villains. They will do their things, but ultimately they will be wrong at the end of the day. Stain really only has one thing out of the many things he says that I think is worth keeping in mind, and that is the end result that he ultimately wants. But when it comes to Stain, for me personally, I don't understand how people can see that this guy wants an end result and then see that he has no way of getting there and still believe in the guy. When you have an end result that you want and you have no real way of actually getting there, and I do believe that Stain's methods aren't going to help anything, what you ultimately have isn't a future goal, it's a fantasy. And so when I see this in the fandom, it's like, how would I best explain this feeling? I think the older viewers of this video would understand the exact problems with people who sell you on a future but then don't know how to get there, and then ultimately don't execute on bringing that future to fruition. I'm sure the older viewers know many people in the real world who have done that. But we'll leave that there. Ultimately, when it comes to Stain, what you have to really, as a reader, what you have to understand now is that we spent 3 chapters having a particular rhetoric shoved down our throats. That rhetoric was about accepting that the heroes are human. That rhetoric comes into extreme conflict with Stain's rhetoric, because Stain's rhetoric, as part of its tenets, requires denying the humanity of the heroes, and he does it in this chapter. Stain has always denied the humanity of heroes. So ultimately what you have here is that Hero Academia is going to have Ochako's rhetoric versus Stain's rhetoric, and when all is said and done, Stain's an idiot, so he's automatically wrong, and Ochako is going to be the one that's going to be correct because she's the main girl, and whatever she's saying is going to be the thing that's going to be promoted by the end of the series. And again, you know, Stain's good point is that he doesn't want corrupt heroes going out and about. But guess what? What he has done nothing about corrupt heroes. I have seen no corrupt heroes in any of My Hero Academia aside from the ones that showed up in Liberation Army. Otherwise, Endeavor, Native, Ingenium, these 3 that we know that Stain has an issue with, these are not the people that you want to be taking out. And when we come back to this whole thing of the heroes are being sorted, there's so many problems with that general line of thought, but we'll talk about it a little bit when we get to the end and we talk about what Matthew had brought up, because it's a really good point. Ultimately, with Stain, this chapter shows all of Stain's flaws, and ultimately, if you are someone that's 100% on the Stain bandwagon and is not applying nuance to Stain in general, well, that's great. The story itself will eventually prove Stain wrong. Right now, we're at a point where you can't, realistically, you cannot be supporting Ochako's rhetoric and be supporting Stain's rhetoric as well in its entirety. And I keep saying entirety because the only thing that Stain really has going for him is that he has that final idea about a just society, but the thing is, he doesn't know how to get there. Stain has never shown good judgment. Anyone that says that he's shown good judgment has been taken in by the propaganda. But Stain's always going to be an interesting thing. Let's get into the chapter here, and let's have a really good time. Alright, so chapter 326. So the first page is actually pretty cool. We have an establishing shot, and we find out that Ectoplasm does in fact know that All Might was at the shelter. And we have All Might saying that he's going to go check hero-hating groups who refuse to join a shelter. So that was really interesting, because we never actually saw that conversation. So already the author, this is a little bit of what the author does. He gives you a cliffhanger, and then the next chapter, first thing he does, oh, hey, look, I gotta recontextualize that cliffhanger and show you an event that you had no way of knowing that happened. This is 100% Horikoshi style. It only works in the format of a magazine. Horikoshi, he sets things out to make it look really bad at the end of a chapter, and then the next chapter he opens it up and, oh look, no, it's actually a lot more reasonable. And there's actually a lot of more question marks. But this is Horikoshi style just right there. At the end of the day, the guy knows how to manipulate excitement for the magazine, and it's ultimately the cliffhangers are ultimately a tool that really work in Shonen Jump, and it's something that's encouraged across all the series. Some series do it well, some series do it middling, and then some series do it like Shokugeki no Soma, which just makes everything a lot more annoying. So that's what we got here. Now at the bottom one, we have All Might ultimately thinking about Izuku, and if you remember the last video, I told you guys, All Might's is feeling bad about Izuku. Oh, and actually, speaking about villain and sensationalism, people were upset that All Might wasn't Toga. And it's like, no, you give too much credit to the villains. This story is not about the villains. This is a story about how the heroes ultimately save the villains, because the villains are all insane. Except Gentle. Gentle's actually probably like a really good villain. Anyway, so good establishment page, really good. Page 2 is a really silent page, just ultimately All Might thinking about Izuku, and we see that Shoto's ice is still in the background. I really think I would love to do an experiment of how long it takes a tower of ice to melt in rainy conditions. I'm just so curious. Anyway, we see that Izuku's mask is here, and this is actually something I think is quite mean. I mean, why did the kids not pick up Izuku's gear? That's really cruel. So, shame on the kids. They should have done better. They should have picked up Izuku's stuff. I am not a fan of that. But at least All Might picks it up. Anyway, we then go into page, what page are we on? Page 3, where All Might looks at the statue, and he's just feeling bad about himself because he couldn't do anything for his disciple when he was hurting. And I just want to add this, and this is a really good point about the chapter. This is a chapter that only works because the author has created a very clear chain of causation and a chain of characterization when it comes to All Might's character. If All Might did not have his flaws so readily available, this whole thing really falls apart. And it's the same thing with Izuku. Izuku and All Might right now are acting on their flaws. And this guy's going to be saying, I couldn't do anything for my disciple when he was hurting, right? Right? He's making that point. Let me give you the flip side to that. All Might couldn't do anything for his former sidekick when his former sidekick was hurting for All Might's sake. This is 100% regular All Might. And that's why All Might, when we had that first fall with Izuku, he's talking about the words he couldn't say. Because All Might is still stuck in the same problems that ultimately caused the Night Eye situation. So this is more of the same. This guy's not going to learn his lesson. Stain comes in at the end and hopefully gives him a little bit of a wake-up call. But ultimately what you have to really take away from this is that when it comes to these character flaws, it really depends on whether or not the author wants the characters to stick with it. Now, with Izuku, we saw a very aggressive move where Izuku just did not remember what Bakugo had told him, that being stop doing things by yourself, right? So if the author wants, he can always come in here and just reset the character development or reset the trauma. For All Might, it makes sense that he is not fully applying the lessons he learned from the Night Eye situation, and he's 100% going to keep invoking Night Eye, because we're approaching that time where Night Eye, he's coming up more in the story, it's going to keep happening. But yeah, no, what you ultimately see here is props to the author, because he has a very consistent All Might, that being an All Might of flaws. Like last week I said it, right? All Might's going to be feeling pretty down on himself because of the whole Izuku situation, because that's who he is. Also, I like that I'm pretty sure if he gets the opportunity, he's going to bow down before Inko again, because that's who All Might is. He's the kind of guy that runs away from his problems when it comes to interpersonal problems. He's not good at fighting societal pressures. We then have a recall to the Aizawa event, and this is like, if you follow the videos, you know this is a pretty big event for my personal ideas, because it's these events where Aizawa sets up that All Might and UA are a safe place for All Might to be in, that we can pretty much say that's why UA is going to be attacked, because ultimately Aizawa's ideas about UA have to be challenged, because he keeps setting it up as this giant symbol of safety. We move on, and All Might is pretty much wallowing when he says you're only getting in the way, All Might. So he's having his little emotional tirade. We then have Stain arriving, and he says, what vile blasphemy against a hero? And we have this whole conversation here where All Might thinks that Stain doesn't know who All Might is. Now, it's clear by the end of the chapter that Stain knows this is All Might. What you're seeing here with Stain is flat out his ideology speaking. When he says, you aren't All Might, he's talking about the symbol. And this is the big thing with Stain. Stain drank the Kool-Aid when it came to heroes. And we have this from like the very beginning. Stain bought into the idea of a hero. And that's the big thing that leads into him denying heroes their humanity, denying heroes their weaknesses. This entire thing is Stain being upset that All Might has feelings and can fail and has ruminations on his failure. What Stain is ultimately saying is like, I don't want to see your human weakness. And you can see it too when he talks about a god falling into mortal lands. This man's insane. This man is a zealot. Imagine, like Shoto said it, anachronistic and fundamentalist. Imagine that everyone that supports Stain is essentially like a fundamentalist religious zealot. Because that's exactly what it is. You can't have a man talking about God in a holy land and not say, all right, we have a cult. We actually have a religious zealot cult following the word of Stain. But no, that's ultimately Stain. That's who he is. Now, when it comes to page 4 and 5, pretty good introduction. I will, of course, show you where we know for sure that Stain knew that this was All Might. But he 100% knows it's All Might, because it's like, why follow him around if you don't think it's All Might? So we go into page 6 where he goes flat out wrong. You're not All Might. Now, when he says that, he means All Might the symbol. He doesn't care about the man behind the symbol. And remember, actually, just saying that out loud, I think having a contrast and remembering last week's events really assists with this one, because there are some really aggressive parallels here. Like last week, the Starfin guy, he had a line that said, once upon a time, the unmatched All Might showed us all how to be a hero. He was the act to follow and everyone cheered him on. That's pretty much what Stain does. But along the way, people forgot about the heart and the soul that made the man. Yeah, they did. They 100% did. And this is Stain right here. So that's what you're having here. This is a person who has forgotten the heart and soul that made him. Anyway, All Might transforms into his muscular form for a second, and Stain has his wonderful moment where he says he's not All Might and calls All Might a sham. And then you have the religious zealot kind of talk where he says, here upon hero holy ground, you dare falsely claim the mantle of hero. And again, Stain is someone who has bought full into the word hero and its classical definition. He wants a classical hero. That's what it is. And then he gets upset with the whole calling him a hero. Like, honestly, this whole thing is just Stain having his ideologies come out. Now we go into page 8. We see All Might looking at a scene. There's destruction. There's some tape. He's talking about people having their lives stolen, and he just couldn't sit on the sideline. He had to make the world a better place. And then he goes into this really aggressive thing where he says this is the end result. And then he goes on to say that he gives his life in an instant to protect people, but he couldn't bring himself to tell Izuku to take a break, right? So there's a lot of things going on this page. First off, I really hope no one that All Might knew was in that wreckage. I hope that was him getting upset for people in general, and that's what spurred him into action. Which, great. It looks like he's running towards the wreckage, maybe to help people out. Now, when he says this is the end result, no, All Might, this isn't the end result of your actions. This is the result of All for One's actions. Like, you are fighting a guy who has way more power than you. Like, All for One ultimately wanted this. At some point, you have to kind of understand that this isn't his fault, right? This is ultimately the fault of All for One, the one who would orchestrate it. He's brought things back to the way he wanted to bring them back. This is the everlasting fight with All for One. You tried, but what can you do? Now, All Might also makes another kind of false equivalence here, where he says, I would give up my life to protect Izuku. But he couldn't talk to Izuku. Well, that's the thing there. There's a fundamental difference. Giving up a life for All Might is a lot easier than talking about the hard topics. That's just fundamentally it. All Might, ultimately, he's only good at being a symbol. He's only good at being that guy that saves people. That's all he knows how to do. He doesn't know how to talk with people normally. We know this from the Night Eye situation. He runs away from people when he doesn't want to have the hard conversations. That's who All Might is. So the unfortunate thing here is that All Might's talking about, I'm willing to die for him, but I can't talk to him. Well, that's just fundamentally I guess you could say the tragedy of All Might. He's only ever good at doing those big, bold, heroic things, but he can't. And this is ultimately why All Might is the one person who definitely will never be able to answer societal evils. He'll never be able to fix the issue with the mutant shapes and the discrimination towards them. He's never going to be able to fix shaming Gentle's family when Gentle made a mistake. He's not going to be able to fix issues like domestic abuse or poverty, because that's just not who he is. He wants to stop the big, bold, clear injustices that are super simple before him. The man just does not do well in these kind of personal situations. And you could make the case that it's because he spent his whole life working as a hero that All Might ultimately doesn't have the skills to be able to talk to Izuku the way he needed to be able to talk to Night Eye the way he needed to. And then we continue with All Might's depression. He thinks about the scene of everyone helping Izuku and like bringing out umbrellas, and then he goes on to say that he feels like he's the only one who's become more distant from heroes and from heroism. This is All Might being depressed. Honestly, this is All Might after having his one thing, like that being saving people from clear destruction. After having that taken away, he's just left without a purpose. This happens a lot to retirees who are left without a purpose when they have nothing to do and they haven't picked up golf yet. So this is just him feeling bad for himself, whatever. Again, it's nice that we have Stain here to, to stain him up a little bit. This is ultimately All Might wallowing. As to whether or not he becomes more distant from heroes and from heroism, as I recall it, All Might he faced down villains, and he helped escort a young lady to a shelter. As far as I'm concerned, All Might's still pretty heroic. He's going out there, he's doing dangerous stuff, he's helping out. Nah, he's not that far from heroes. He's just upset that he can't do what he used to do when he was in his prime. We are now moving into the era for All Might where he has to be satisfied with everyday heroics and inspiring the next generation. But for All Might, someone who is defined by his work and workaholic tendencies, what are you going to do when you have that taken away from you? Ultimately, like, All Might's crisis here is akin to a midlife crisis, or a crisis that retirees have when they stop working all of a sudden. Some people are just made to work. We move into page 10 where we see the young lady arriving and Stain being very aggressive with the All Might head holding. And here's one of the critical lines that tells you that Stain was always cognizant of who this person was. All Might says, from the start, I haven't felt real bloodlust for him. That's right. Even when this man had a sword to this guy's neck, All Might never feared. And that's the thing. Stain did not come here to hurt him. Stain came here to give him a little bit of a wake-up call in the way that only Stain could. And then I do appreciate All Might's little sarcastic remark there. And then we find out that this girl has been coming. She says that they did it again, and she's cleaning the thing off of All Might's statue. Now, I think it is wonderful that this girl comes out every day to clean this up, and I think it's even more wonderful that someone comes every day to put it back up. That is hilarious to me. Wow, people have priorities. I'm not gonna make fun of the girl. I think she's cool. I think the people that are coming in and putting that sign up multiple times are the problem. Anyway, Stain goes on to tell us that every day she persists the blasphemy erected by the hero detractors. Again, it's wonderful. By following Stain, anyone who's 100% with Stain is a religious zealot, and I think that is a wonderful situation to be in when it comes to the online fandom. And then he talks about how the girl probably travels from a nearby shelter and causes inconvenience. And then Stain ultimately says that's the last person that All Might saved, and she's coming out here essentially to return the favor. Now, there are many, many, many details here. First off, how does Stain know that she comes here every day? That means that Stain watches this place every day. Like, he's updating himself on what's going on the Holy Ground every day. Actually, the fact that he calls it the Holy Ground actually makes that make sense. Now, we had an interesting talk about this when it comes to this. When it comes to it being this lady, the last one that All Might saved, being the one to show up here, there's two interpretations here that are at play. One is, what does this do for the story as a reading experience? As a reading experience, it's visceral. It feels good because you're like, oh yeah, I know her. Crap, wow, yeah, wow, way to go. I really appreciate you. But in the context of Hero Academia, there's a little bit of a problem that starts creeping up here. And to Jason Thomas's, and this is a commenter, his credit, he said it, like, this is really on the nose that the people who are returning the favor are the people that the heroes have helped. There is a problem with the people returning the favor or the ones that have been helped, because that makes it seem in Hero Academia society like you can't have someone who is completely unrelated to a hero being the one to lift their hand up first. And this goes back to the whole Koda situation with Izuku. Koda and this random girl that Izuku helped were the ones that came out for him, and this starfish guy who might have remembered Izuku and was one of his early, like, friendly stranger supporters. The problem here is that we want to avoid an overall perception that it's only people who have a connection to the heroes that help. And mind you, in that particular narrative, what you would ultimately say is like, oh, those people are the ones who will bridge the gap between the heroes and the complete strangers. And that's perfectly fine. But in terms of optics, this makes Hero Academia Society look a little bit worse. I think if you want to improve this, I think you could have had this girl come out there, leading maybe 4 or 5 people to help her. And then you could have the 4 or 5 people be just randoms. The thing is, we don't want to be in a situation where it looks like random acts of kindness don't happen. I legitimately want to see someone I've never seen before just be a nice person. I don't want to see people I don't want to see civilians who have to be scolded or talked to or made to feel bad or be emotionally guilt-tripped. I want to see someone legitimately just come out of nowhere and just help. Mind you, the thing is that it seems like the people that genuinely do that are people who become heroes. So that's why this is a little bit of a tricky issue. What you have to appreciate here is that in terms of this as a product and as something that entertains people, this is the good move to bring back a character that we know for that very visceral reaction. But this says something very negative and very pessimistic about Hero Academia Society. And there are many ways to just go about fixing this. And ultimately, you really need that random act of kindness. Because at the end of the day, what's going to save Hero Academia Society are random acts of kindness. We need to get to a point where an old lady, completely unrelated to any hero, is able to say like, oh, hey, little boy with creepy eyes, let me take you to the police station and help you out. That's what we need. I don't need people acting on the kindness that was given to them by a hero. I need people to be good to everyone. That's what the Hero Academia Society needs, because that way we prevent situations like Shigaraki. Now here we go into page 13, and here is where we have like both the questionable things and some positive things going on here. I'll take this panel by panel. In the first panel, Stain says, in the worst times, All Might would maintain that grit and devote every fiber of his being to the people. It had nothing to do with powers or quirk. The man we knew as All Might could not live his life any other way. So, first, to talk about it had nothing to do with power or quirks, what I want to point you to here is that he points out that in the worst times, All Might would grin and still do his job. See, this is the first thing. Stain doesn't care about the man who is scared. He wants to see the man that would grin despite however terrible things got. And we all know that All Might, and we know in Hero Academia in general, there is a philosophy of smiling even when you're scared, because that ultimately gives comfort to the people around them. We've seen this in Provisional License. I feel like, I want to say like Crimson Riot talked about this too, but I don't think he did. But we see this in Provisional License. And we also, ironically, saw it in Ochako's flashback, where you saw Eel Boy, I believe his name was. You know, he was hurt, but then when he saw people looking at him, he put on a brave face, he smiled at them, and he gave them that confidence. This is the facade of a hero. They're hurting underneath, and Ochako already covers this, right? She covered how behind those smiles there's people there. We've again spent 3 weeks on it, but here is ultimately what Stain is telling him. You've got to smile even when things are terrible. Well, okay, now we're fully denying All Might's own personal situation here. Now, when he says that All Might could not live his life any other way, okay, that's true. All Might was relatively a workaholic, but as we saw, All Might had a lot of baggage that he was keeping hidden that a lot of people don't know about. And this reminds me of one of those early Stain moments where Stain full-on denies heroes their humanity. You know, what's actually really funny when it comes to this whole Stain situation and All Might, by Stain's definition, is the furthest from the title of a hero from the beginning of the story. Referencing this old page about Stain, becoming seized by hatred for the enemy before your eyes merely to satisfy your own selfish desires, that is the act furthest from the title of hero, and that is in reference to when Ida came out to get revenge for his brother. Now, hearing that, you likely recall there is someone that All Might was seized by hatred when he saw him before his eyes, and he acted to satisfy his urges of revenge, that being All For One. We know that All Might was so negatively compromised by All For One that Gran Torino had to tell him to calm himself down, to not let All For One get under his skin. So ultimately, when you have this page here, this is the page that tells you this is the denial of All Might's humanity. All Might has not been what Stain thinks he is from the beginning of the story. Anyway, Stain continues. He has a wonderful phase talking about he carved those ideals into his very soul and was lauded for it. Stain does not know the nature of All Might's soul. But then he says the one good thing, the end result, nah, his influence lives on. I agree with him fully. I fully agree that All Might's influence lives on. And then we go into that wonderful page of the kids. Now, here again is one of those things where you have to look at who's in the picture. I found it funny that Ida's in that picture because it's probably All Might imagining it. But Ida is someone that, according to Stain, would not so easily change, but we see how easily Ida changed. Ida's a testament to how wrong Stain is as well. Anyway, he does make a good point that the people that follow All Might are picking up the slack and they're going to turn into a new flame. I actually think that's a really good point, and I'm all for it. Like, this is where Stain has some good points in general. Stain then goes on to say that the people must not let that fire die out. No matter how undignified the struggle, they must stoke the flame so long as they draw breath. So actually, I think that's pretty cool. Like, that's just saying ultimately people need to keep trying to be heroes. And again, this is one of those good ideas that Stain has. Now, I do want to say something. At the top, he said the flickering ember he left behind is nurtured by the select few who succumb neither to chilling rain nor howling wind. Now, that's pretty interesting, that particular line. I wonder, though, what about those that succumbed to the criticism and the yells of the people around them? Because this is part of Ochako's rhetoric and how people help people. Now, as far as I'm concerned, we saw Izuku at the other end of the mob. His danger sense was going off. There was some intent to like really hurt this kid, as we understand how danger sense works. And Izuku actually turned away. So what about that? Well, what do you do when the public reaction is so set against you? Now, mind you, chilling rain, no howling wind is very poetic, very flowery. It might encompass all kinds of troubles if you take the metaphor like that. But ultimately, there's a little bit more nuance here. There are more sources of stress that heroes have to deal with. And in All Might's case, he's dealing with interpersonal problems, not just the tribulations of the physicality of being a hero. We then move into page 14, where the girl says that she's doing her best and she hopes that All Might does his best too. And then we have more of Stain's dialogue here. Now this is the critical line, because when White Despair, a commenter, and I spoke about this, it sounded a really weird way, but I think this line is actually pretty simple. Here, Stain goes in and says a hero can only claim that title as long as his soul burns fiercely in service of others. That's just talking about how Stain reveres the word heroes. If there was ever a person who would be positively affected by changing the title hero, it's Stain. Again, quirky service worker, quirky civil servant is probably if you call a hero a quirky civil servant, you are able to get rid of a good chunk of Stain's rhetoric, because a good chunk of the rhetoric is based on the idea of a classic hero. But here we go. This is the critical line. Say a god has fallen, and then you have the bolded line, prostrate upon the earth, and his divine soul has turned feeble and mortal. First off, All Might was never a god. All Might was never had a divine soul. All Might is a terrible talker. But, again, religious zealot. Prostrate upon the earth. Then All Might says, what, you saw that all this time you've been... Okay, so what All Might's saying here, I'm pretty sure, he's referencing this scene from chapter 317, when All Might has quite literally fallen onto the earth, prostrate upon the earth. That is what he's talking about, I am pretty sure. When we were looking at this on the spoilers, we thought that maybe this might be some kind of indication of a shared past, but no. So here, let me fill in the gaps so you understand what perspective I have on this. What? You saw that moment when I fell to the ground after Izuku left me? All this time you've been following me? Now the reason that's being brought up is because this is the clincher that says, oh, Stain knew who I was the entire time. And that is ultimately what comes back to the whole thing with how All Might felt no bloodlust. And also the fact that Stain knew that this girl was one of the last people that All Might saved. If Stain knows this is one of the last people that All Might saved, it means he must have seen something of Camino to know that girl was there. And that, it gets kind of sketchy because there's many ways he could find out, but it ultimately says that he's aware of some degree of the All Might timeline. Anyway, that's ultimately what I think this final panel is saying. I don't think there's any deeper connection between the two. I think this is just talking about the fact that Stain saw All Might, and that is ultimately leading to the fact that Stain always knew that All Might was All Might. Anyway, Stain goes on to say, I don't presume to know you, because that's just him playing it off. And then he tells him, then he gives All Might information that he got from his time in Tartarus. So I don't even know what kind of information that could be, but I hope it's something that will work. And then Stain goes on to say, come for the life of Stain, the man who murdered 40 heroes. We talked about this a little bit more, because I think it was 17 heroes that people told me that Stain had actually killed. I haven't checked, but whatever. I don't really care about the number too much. I'm not gonna split hairs, because Stain might be waxing on poetically. He might be saying murdered in the sense that he murdered the careers of these heroes, if we're counting all of them. But whatever. What you have to appreciate here is that there's a little bit of a paradox. That being that if All Might's a true hero, he's not going to kill Stain. Stain's going to end up in jail. That's what the true hero is going to do to Stain. And then Stain's line about the whole fixing the society. Stain would wish that his death would lead to society fixing itself, but no. Society's going to fix itself by people helping people, not by this whole little rhetoric that Stain has of weeding out the heroes that aren't worthy. And then at the end of the chapter, we have the rain is finally letting up. That's important just because that's saying that we're going to be going towards a positive upswing for a little bit, just because the author put a lot of significance onto the rain. So now we're going towards positivity. And the good thing is that because we know that Ectoplasm has seen All Might, that means everyone knows where All Might is doing. So he isn't MIA for UA. So hopefully this will lead to good conversations. And if we go into the next chapter and it's some positivity, probably it's going to include All Might apologizing flat out. Now, I do want to talk about very quickly, like, one of the issues with Stain, because I want to make sure that Matthew's idea comes out here. But on the live stream, Matthew had given us a parable from the Bible. And I'm not usually one to quote the Bible, but one thing I want you to take away from this is just the fact that it's in the Bible means that this is a very easy to access idea. So this isn't a unique idea in any which way. The reason I'm bringing it up is because we might see some idea of it. And this parable from the Bible is ultimately one that is very worthwhile when it comes to Stain, because it speaks to a lot of the logistical problems when it comes to Stain's method. So this is a parable, the parable of the weeds, and I will do my best to go through it and also tell you the parallels here, and I'll do my best to apply it to the Stain situation. So essentially, there was a man who sowed his seed in a field, but while his men were sleeping, the enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat, and then they went away. So in this case, the wheat is the good stuff and the weeds are the bad stuff, or the wheat are the good heroes and the weeds are the bad heroes. So anyway, the plants grow up a little bit and then the weeds appeared along with them. Anyway, the servants of the house come to the master guy and they're like, yo, there's weeds out there, man. Do you want us to go out there and like pluck them out? And then the master was pretty much like, nah. If you go gathering the weeds and you try to uproot them now, before they are fully grown, you might pull the wheat along with them. So he goes on to say, let both of them grow together until harvest, and at the harvest time, that's when you can gather the weeds and bind them, and then gather the wheat. So now the general idea that I wanted to point you at here is the premature weeding of the heroes, because this actually applies to Stain like 100%. Stain is an idiot. Stain does not have good judgment. To this day, we do not know the criteria for which Ingenium was targeted, because from everything that we've seen in Vigilantes, Stain is the kind of person that changes his mind after getting beat up by the Crawler, and Ingenium is a legitimate, true hero. Just like how in the story, being too premature could end up in pulling out the good crop, so too with Stain being too premature with his judgments could he ruin other people. For instance, Ida. Stain essentially said that Ida wasn't going to change, but we saw Ida change immediately after. He was a child. He could still grow. And then we look at other people. Endeavor. Taking out Endeavor and denying him his opportunity to grow. Well, you would have ruined society right there. Because as we've seen, Endeavor puts in a lot of effort to actually try and maintain the peace. Another person, Native. Native, ultimately being a false hero, went out there and died in the line of action against Nomu. When Nomu arrived, he did not run away. And now when we have these new heroes who are, turning in their capes, it's like, well, these people are also just being beaten down from both sides. Some of them are getting beaten down by the people they're trying to protect, and they just can't deal with it. You can't deny them their humanity. They're people too, like Ochako says. Other people witnessed a monster destroy more than 20 cities. That's more than most people could ever really handle. Ultimately, when it comes to Stain, the problem is his judgment is extremely flawed. And I think it'd be really cool if one day there is someone directly talking back to Stain, telling him that, hey, you were too hasty in plucking the weeds and you plucked out some of the really good heroes. Ingenium would be a really good example here. So I just wanted to say thanks to Matt for telling us about that little parable, because it actually does apply to Stain. The fact that it's in such an old text, I do hope that one day the author comes up with a similar implementation to the idea that Stain's judgment was too flawed and therefore too hasty. And I would love to see him talk more about that. In terms of the next chapter, yeah, I'm feeling that we are heading towards a positive chapter, and I would like to see All Might come back and maybe tell us about that information that he got from Stain. Again, I don't know what kind of information he could have gotten from the way that this is worded, but maybe the author will give a little bit more context here. I really hope that that knife that he threw into the paper did not like cut through one of the really critical lines or something like that. Anyway, guys, that's it for me. Thank you so much for watching. That was Hero Academia chapter 326, a wonderful chapter of Stain's insanity at 100%. Ultimately, when it comes to Stain, well, you have to look at, like, the guy has some good points within the insanity, but you can't just accept them 100%. Nuance has to be applied, like all things in Hero Academia. Anyway, guys, let me know what you thought down below, and until next time, I hope you have an absolutely great day.